Cyber season is in full swing with our pals Isotope and Native Instruments.
Get huge discounts on everything from Guitar Rig 7,
Complete 14 bundles,
and one of our favorites here at the Cult and Culture Podcast,
Ozone 11 EQ. Go to isotope.com
and nativeinstruments.com
to feast on the audio goodness. Yum.
You can also get additional savings on other softwares by using the code
RUIN10.
DistroKid now also has a motherfucking app. The DistroKid app is available for iOS and Android. You can download it at distrokid.com/app/, or you can get it in the App Store.
Welcome to episode 2 of the Cult and Culture Podcast. I'm Justin Pearson.
And I'm Luke Henshaw, and once again, we're at Penguin Studios in San Diego, California. Today's episode, we're talking about vinyl records, their album covers, and their distinctive styles, I guess.
Yeah.
Right?
Maybe like sort of a linear influence by certain labels and certain artists.
I want to stress like the connection between the actual artistry that goes behind the album covers themselves and the different shapes and designs of the vinyl records, that the fans feel a connection to the artists and the bands and such like that.
Yeah, this might be a tangent, but a lot of it is, I think, is interesting because I think younger people don't have a connection to artwork, you know, where they'll just kind of have an MP3, and it's sort of like, I don't know, like this, to me, non-existent thing, you know, like it doesn't really physically, tangibly exist. And probably for both of us, I mean, I'm sure for both of us, like growing up, like as kids, like just obsessing over records. I mean, I would just look at covers and just be enthralled with the details.
Yeah, I agree.
But even like people will like often write me and say, can we have the lyrics to this Retox album? And I'm like, well, if you bought it, you got the lyrics. And they're like, oh, well, I'm assuming like they downloaded it illegally, but then they're like, well, I got it off iTunes. There's just no way to get the lyrics. Yeah. So I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's, especially being like a singer in bands or whatever, I've always been interested in knowing what the person's singing. And if you buy a download, chances are you're going to get the cover maybe, but not the liner notes, you know, yeah. not the details to it. So, yeah, I think it's something that's very important. But also, like, I mean, when I was younger, like just obsessing over like bands like, you know, the Dead Kennedys and the Sex Pistols and just looking at photos, you know, like, and looking at the artwork that kind of was attached to it says something more. It sets up, I mean, yeah, there's the music and there's the style of the music, but there's also the style of the art, and there's things that are influencing, I think, as an overall entity of what a band or an album is.
Yeah.
So then that would bring us into what our next podcast is about with Sonny Kay. So for me, I was always obsessing over Gravity Records and things like that, which Sonny has a relationship with through his band Angelhair. And so I was constantly like just kind of tripping out on like the way that the packaging and the artwork was, and it was always something special. And this is kind of strange or interesting that you brought up like the marketing of your current 7-inch, where back then there was no way to market it. You know, there was no internet, and so it was like so much more special when you were like in a record store and you saw, you know, the Angelhair 7-inch or the Heroin 7-inch in the paper bag on the shelf, and you just were like, what the hell is this? This is so crazy and weird. And so yeah, I mean, I think like it would kind of bring in this whole like lineage of things that would influence a culture of people who are into records and music and vinyl, but it really influenced me, I guess, with the Locust specifically, because we put out so many records through GSL, and so there was like the eventually ended up becoming like the puzzle record and things like that, but using like spot gloss and using different elements that I think a lot of people don't use, and a lot of bigger labels and pressing plants don't even consider. Just making it interesting and special on another level.
Yeah, I agree.
Without further ado, here's our conversation with Sonny Kay. Here we are with Sonny Kay. I guess we would say legendary singer and owner of GSL. Hello.
Hi.
Do you want to run through your resume for a second for people that aren't aware?
Sure. Yeah. I founded GSL in college in 1993 and ran it into the ground in 2007. And then was the art director for Rodriguez Lopez Productions from about 2008 for about 5 years, and then creative director at Sargent House Records, kind of simultaneous to that, and then it's kind of on and off a little bit ever since. A freelance graphic designer and artist for the past 10 years.
In all of your bands?
Okay, so yes, Savalas, Angelhair.
You just looked past all that stuff.
Sorry,
by the way.
Well, they're not like jobs really. They're more, I think of them differently. So Savalas, Angelhair, the VSS, Your Future, Optional Body.
Subpoena the Past.
Sorry, yeah, that's right.
Cool. So, I guess it's weird because a lot of stuff I hear. I always hear that like Angelhair was from San Diego, and it's obviously the Gravity thing. But so how did that come about? Like your relationship with Gravity, and then I guess why do you think people? I guess it's pre-internet, so maybe that's why people outside of San Diego or.
Well, and the records are for the most part recorded here, or at least the ones that Matt put out on Gravity were recorded here. So it gave you the impression that we're probably from here.
Yeah.
Well, I met Matt. I met Heroin when Savalas played here in 1992. I found out about Heroin in Boulder from a kid from the Bay Area whose mom lived in Boulder, and he came at Christmas one year and like brought all these records. Told me about Heroin, and we were getting ready to do the first Savalas tour.
So how old were you?
I would have been about 19.
Okay.
And Bob and Savalas wrote a letter to the address for Heroin on the Vinyl Communications record. And then a few weeks later, we got a letter back from Scott.
So this is before Gravity.
Yeah, I guess it was probably right around the start of it.
Okay.
I think by the time we came out at spring break, like a few months later, that Paperback record was just coming out.
Okay.
So we got this letter back from Scott, and he was like, "Yeah, I'll set up a show for you guys." So we played at the Che with them with Heroin, and then I sort of was just, it was before the internet, so I didn't really stay in touch with them. The following summer, I came out with my girlfriend just kind of on a road trip, and I was like, well, I don't know where to go. We'll just go to Encinitas because it's cool there. And then we got there, and Scott was walking up the street, and we kind of looked at each other, and I was like, oh, hey, what's up, man? And then 10 minutes later, we were on our way to his house to crash out, and wound up staying there for a few days. And they were just recording the Click-a-Tat demo tape then.
Okay.
And he was like, yeah, I've got this new band, and we're going to go on tour. And so a few months later, over Christmas, they came to Boulder and then broke down in Colorado.
Yeah.
And so we're there for 3 days, and that's when I kind of had Matt to myself kind of thing.
Oh, Matt was with Click-a-Tat?
Matt was with them selling stuff, and so we just, I was like, listen to this Angelhair song we did with this other drummer who was Paul had quit for a little while, and we did one song with another dude. And anyway, it wasn't even that good, but he was into it and invited us to record when we came out the following spring break, which would have been 2 years after the first one with Savalas. Okay. So 2 years later, we came back with Angelhair.
Sure.
And made the EP on Gravity we recorded at Bob Barley's place.
You recorded it with Bob?
No, we recorded at his place with Matt.
Oh, with Matt. Okay.
Yeah.
Huh, that's interesting. Yeah, actually, Matt Anderson recorded the first Swing Kids song at Bob's house too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's strange how that whole. I guess because of Heroin and
and he didn't really have a place yet, and in fact, we weren't really that happy with the vocals because they'd been kind of rushed. Mm-hmm. And so a month later, or a couple weeks later, I flew back, and we actually redid the vocals in the house on 5th, whatever.
Oh,
4th Street, 5th Street, or whatever. Uh-huh. Just in his bedroom.
Wow, all of them. For the 7-inch?
Yeah, those 4 songs.
So, I think like an interesting thing about that record would be yours and Matt's artistic ideas and stuff. I mean, it's loaded.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like it was really like that was like the start of a lot of like really interesting packaging. Because I mean, I'm sure there's stuff before that, but for the most part, it was kind of everything was kind of. I mean, there was like Ebullition, which had like its own style. But I remember when like that 7-inch came out and the paper bag 7-inch,
Yeah.
the Antioch Arrow and the
Yeah.
and the Antioch Arrow record, but the Angelhair, the Heroin 7-inch. I guess the Antioch Arrow, and then there was one other. But it
Well,
was, like,
yeah,
all these.
He
things
did a
are-
bunch of them. Like in the time between that paper bag record, he put out the John Henry West record.
Oh, and and there was a Born
And,
Against.
Born Against
yeah.
UOA record. And those 2 records were in those envelopes.
Yeah.
And so he was sort of like, yeah, do the envelope thing, but like switch it up.
Make it. Oh,
And
so
I
it was
was-
his idea.
Yeah, he was like, he was like, I feel like it's getting repetitive already.
Yeah.
Like if you want to do, he's like, I print them myself, so we can do something different. You can do color if you want.
So he was just silk screening.
No, it kind of looks like that, but no, they were printed on an offset press. So, but like, it's weird to like. I don't think they usually run a whole finished envelope through press. You usually run a flat piece of paper,
Sure.
and then it's finished later. So, but he was printing them like that, taking finished envelopes. I don't know, cutting the tops off
Yeah.
or whatever, and then printing them color by color on the offset press that way. And so did it. I don't know how many. It's like 4 or 5 colors. It must have taken a long time to do.
Sure. Whose idea was that? His?
Kind of both. I can't. I think it was probably his because I feel like he definitely gave me the green light to do the color. He was like didn't want it to just be black and white.
Yeah.
As far as what the art was and stuff, he was like, it's it's entirely your thing.
Sure.
And so I remember like making it at Kinko's or whatever and sending him sort of a not really a color key, but like an overlay thing for it. And
Kinko's had the different color copier options back then too, red and blue.
Well, actually, not where we live. In Boulder, Kinko's didn't. If you wanted color, you had to go to this place called Business Express. But that's beside the point. No, but I sent it to him black and white, but just like was like this is the. This could be a warm layer. I didn't even think I called out colors. I was like,
sure.
maybe make it warm, red or orange, maybe make it blue or something. And so he wound up doing the blend.
Okay.
Like not, like the blend was definitely his idea.
Okay.
But yeah, I guess it is like a pretty good like cross section of both of us.
Sure.
But-
And then there was the album artwork, which was totally different and
Yeah.
also awesome. I mean, it had like copper or something in it, like. It had like
metallic
print,
ink,
I mean,
which is like slightly bittersweet because it's supposed to be 2 words, but it's 1 word.
Oh,
And, like,
yeah,
he's
sure.
gotten grief about it for years.
So
whatever.
who did the layout to it?
So I chose the photo.
Which was like the cells, right?
Yeah, and it just was was writing lyrics about that kind of stuff anyway.
Yeah.
And like Julie and I had been over at her parents' house, and her sister was really small at the time, and had this book, like a science book or something, and that was a picture in it that was open on the table or whatever. And I was like, that's the perfect picture or whatever. So I don't know if I would have been able to scan it. I feel like I probably mailed Matt the book or something.
Well, yeah.
And was like, this is what I want for the front, and it should be cool if it was the same both sides, so you could just keep turning it over, and it's just like a reverse thing. And it was kind of, I think maybe probably suggested metallic ink of some kind. So, but it was, he laid it out and everything, and like did a great job, with the exception of the thing,
Yeah.
the name being wrong. But
Stylistically, though, it's such a crazy contrast to the first 7. I thought it was brilliant. Yeah, it was
Cool.
great. And then, so you recorded everything with Matt.
from that point on, yeah,
Yeah.
the first stuff we recorded in Denver at this place called Time Capsule, which we actually went back and recorded the VSS stuff at later.
Oh, okay.
But and some Matt recorded some VSS stuff too, but yeah, I mean, we either from that point on it was either here at Gravity, Bankers Hill, or whatever, or a Time Capsule in Denver.
Wow. Okay. So then we were talking earlier about like the time span of bands. So it's just it ran its time a couple years, and
Yeah.
you moved on to the VSS. Was after that?
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, Angelhair was lasted barely 2 years and a month or something, 2 to 3 months or something, and it kind of it felt premature at the time because we were just sort of hitting our stride, kind of,
Yeah.
and I didn't want the band to end and give that up because I felt like Andy and I had really you know, committed ourselves for a couple of years to make this thing happen,
Sure.
to make it work, and went through tons of people and stuff, and finally like got to a point where it was, you know, providing us with some kind of satisfaction of
Sure.
on some level, and people were enjoying it, and like we were on a cool label and everything, and like, so to have the rug kind of pulled out from under us with Paul felt weird. But it just, you know, having said that, there was personal stuff going on in the band with other people, with some of those relationships. So like the band ending was kind of convenient too. And
But it's also too like leads. I feel like for a lot of our era bands, or when we were growing up, short-lived bands, you know, even like other bands like Born Against and stuff. It's like, you know, the couple year lifespan that these bands had were only what like kind of made it more like obscure, and in a sense a little bit more special, because a lot of people like wish they had seen it, or you know, it was like cooler, I guess, or more mysterious, you know. So for me with Angelhair, it's funny because the only time I'd never got to see Angelhair, that you played at Tang Records, I think, and I was going. I was so psyched to see you guys play, and I remember I was with Jose Palafox, and we ended up getting arrested and not making it to the show. But so then that was it, and I was like, oh, that band's done, and you know, and that was.
You didn't see that any other time we played here?
I think if you had played, I wasn't like in the know, or maybe I was on tour too or something. But that was like the only chance I remember, and we had we all had issues with Tang because they sold like Screwdriver records and stuff like that. But
we got a discount on those.
Yeah, it's funny because Jose didn't really. I don't think he really was that into that kind of stuff, like the Gravity stuff. But he wanted to go and like just fuck the store up, you know. And I was like, that's cool. Like, I want to see this band, and you can go like shoplift or like break, you know, racist records or whatever. But yeah, we didn't make it to the show. But it was cool because, I mean, it's a bummer that I didn't get to see it, but it made it like, once it was gone, it was like, man, like it made it so much more cooler, you know. And I mean, I would trip out on things like how you guys hard panned the guitars, and you could like there was so much for me like musicianship happening, because I was used to like, all right, the guitars and the bass are going to follow the same riff, and there was not a lot to it, you know. I mean, I think we were still in struggle, or if Swing Kids, kind of the similar thing, like one guitar, and I mean, there wasn't a lot more to like what you would hear from just putting the record on. So I would trip out on like hard panning it, you know, and whatever.
But I think, I mean, I think the musicianship in both bands, particularly since we're talking about Angelhair, like I think like that's what caught Matt's attention. You know what I mean? It's definitely not like me pinning him down in the house for 3 days, like showing him the lyrics or something like that. You know what I mean? It was like, those guys are really good, and they have a really cool, unique combination of styles and stuff. And then with Paul, I mean, the whole thing was just like pretty kind of formed from the get-go, you know. Once Josh showed up, that kind of just like everything gelled around that.
Of course.
And so, I mean, and I guess I think that's probably why people even still listen to those records now, because like that, they're good. They
hold up for sure. I mean, a lot of that stuff of that time, you're kind of like, maybe I would listen to a record for nostalgia, but if you listen to it in this day, it would still be like, I think, musically relevant, you know, which is rad.
Yeah, it's awesome.
So it's crazy because I remember like I think Swing Kids did our first like real like sort of tour, and we were coming back from like the east. We never even made it to the East Coast, but we were coming back from like Michigan Fest or something, and we played at your house, and it was the first VSS show, and it was really a lot. It's crazy. It was like, I think out of all the tours I've done, it was like the VSS show and maybe like an Airborne Radar show. It was like there was so much anticipation because there was all these people saying like the new Angelhair band, they sound like the Cramps, and I was like, what? Like, this is gonna be the best thing ever, you know. And there was all, and you know, I remember like going to your house and going to your basement, and you had like I think you had all the amps lined like with red fabric, and I was like, holy shit, you know, like it was like there was like special, it was, you know, it's kind of like buying the 7-inch, and you're like, whoa, this is like printed and like it's in an envelope, you know. So you're like looking at this band, you're like, fuck, they have like this special stuff already, you know, before they even started. And T-Tari also played too, and maybe it was their first show or something.
I think it was their first show, actually.
So we were so psyched, you know. We were like, God, this is like such a honor, you know, to play and like to see all this cool shit before anybody else is able to. And so that was like, I mean, I was obsessed, you know, at that point. I was like, damn, there's so much cool shit. And I see why people would have, at that time, made like a Cramps reference, I guess. A lot of reverb and stuff, a lot of delay on the vocals or whatever. It was definitely a departure from like hardcore, and
Sure.
So I don't know. I mean, you want to talk about that and how that came about?
Sure. I mean, the Cramps thing. First of all, when you said that, I immediately think of Dave and Dave's aesthetic, the aesthetic that he still kind of has, which is this sort of like goth gigolo kind of dude. You know what I mean? And like I could
sort
see
of Nick Knox ish.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and I wouldn't put it past him to be the person who would have been saying that night at the show or like starting that rumor.
Well, he didn't say it. I think it was like other people saying.
I mean, it could have started. But I mean, there was definitely, first of all, there was definitely like a conscious thing of like not trying to be a hardcore band. Sort of more, we were already kind of tired of hardcore and like, not to knock Kent or anything like that, but the Heart Attack kind of Puritan part of it was already just
everybody was
boring to us. Yeah. And I mean, that's what the Angelhair record is about. That's what the lyrics are all about.
Oh, really?
Like a lot of it. I listen to that record and I just think of Heart Attack and think about like, it's about that stuff. It's not, you know what I mean? It's not for it. It's about it.
Yeah.
And so it's strange that it was embraced by that world.
But do you still think it was?
I mean, Angelhair was like 6 months after we were over, we were like second to best new band or something in the readers poll, I think. So it was like really flattering and so ironic because we were 6 months into the next band.
Yeah, sure.
But I mean, like when when the VSS started, Dave had never played drums and was a really accomplished guitar player. And had been our roadie in Angelhair and wanted to be in this new thing, and we wanted to just switch everything up. And so, like, he was like, "Well, I'll play drums and everything. I'll just teach myself." And we thought that was cool. And there wasn't anybody else around to play drums, and we knew that it would kind of like make the sound primitive because he didn't know how to play drums. He was going to learn, and we were replacing this guy who was like flawless, you know what I mean, and super technical and everything. And so a bunch of that whole thing with the lights and everything like that, like as much as we owned it over time and made it better and all that stuff, at first it was just this kind of bravado to like cover for the fact that we knew we wouldn't be that good. You know what I mean? Like technically speaking, we were like, I mean, Andy was great. Don't get me wrong. Andy was in the band from the beginning, and he's like he's like a virtuoso musician, and Josh is a great musician as well. But those two together, like, their talents sort of like stoked each other.
Sure.
And like,
I mean, you can reference the Cramps as the same thing because the beat was always just like very simple, but there was like cool like two guitars making some strange thing, so,
exactly. And it's got, I mean, their later band, like Slaves and Pleasure Forever, has a kind of swampy sort of thing. That I think you could compare to the Cramps. I don't think the VSS had that per se. I mean, the VSS, like, when we started,
PIL or something.
Yeah, I mean, when we started, like, we were all, I mean, Dave now makes the point that we were all listening to really different stuff all the time, and that's true. Everybody had their favorite things, but I mean, as a band, we were definitely into Metal Box.
Yeah, I could see that.
I was obsessed with, like, Pleasure Principle era Gary Newman. So was Andy. Like, we loved those records, Two Boy Army and stuff. And so to me, that's like the starting point for that stuff. Plus, not to say that Angelhair wasn't a factor in it too, or other, like other bands that were happening at the time a little bit.
And so Angelhair was ahead of its time. VSS was clearly ahead of its time because I remember fucking everyone talking shit about you guys and like making fun, and it's like, and then like, it was weird. It was
but I don't think we would have ever had the nerve to like do the keyboard. I mean, and I could see Andy probably doing it. Andy was a proper trained musician and he'd played piano already. But like, I felt like we got the green light for having a keyboard from Antioch Arrow.
Sure.
I mean,
but there was never an issue. It's weird. There's never an issue with Antioch Arrow. Like, no one ever like felt compelled to like ridicule them.
I think. Well, yeah, and I can't say why exactly.
Maybe because they were like, I don't know, like it seems sketchier or something.
Maybe, and it was like the whole thing was such a wall of noise, and the keyboard seemed like such an afterthought. It was just this thing that was kind of plugged in and like making sound while the rest of the stuff was going on. Whereas with us, like, I think at the very beginning we weren't using a keyboard.
The first show you played, he just played bass.
He just played bass, but I remember like have this mental image of being at the Fireside Bowl and like having this keyboard be out there before we played, like playing itself. Like he set some like arpeggiating loop or something, and like that just went on for 5 or 10 minutes, and then we played, and like, out of that evolved like having it in the songs. I think pretty fast. Yeah. Like, but
and then you also had like a controller set up for the lights, which tell me about that. Like, how did that come about? It was cool aesthetically for sure.
Yeah. So it kind of like I can't remember if at the very beginning there was like, so I would run the vocals through a guitar pedal.
What was it? Delay or something?
Like a DOD delay pedal.
Okay.
But it would, they would break, and I kind of inherited different ones from different people. But I think it was always basically a delay pedal. Yeah. And I think at the very start of the band we were using it right away. So I'm guessing at the start we had some kind of lights and some kind of thing. I mean, Josh was really good with electrical stuff, and so he would build these light rigs that kind of evolved from just like clip-on things on a metal, on a like a wooden stick or something, to like actually being encased in a box that would close to protect them, and we can travel with them and stuff. And so the problem with the foot switches was like in the heat of the moment in a show or whatever, just stomping on the switch, they're super flimsy, and so we're just breaking them constantly, having to replace them. And so the solution to that was to create this thing that, kind of from a distance look like a keyboard stand or something, and have the guitar pedal on there to be able to control the vocal effects and stuff, and have these what he graduated to using light switches instead of foot switches, and that obviously just became way easier to use and like way better reaction time or whatever, and then like actually could like play them like an instrument, and so it kind of like synced them up a little bit better. So
that's great. So you're taking like a light person, and making it the singer's job.
yeah exactly. Wow. And it kind of I felt like it gave me more to do. It kind of like I felt like I was playing the lights sort of, and like and could sort of like, even though it never really was very coherent or planned or rehearsed, even like trying to like do some kind of thing where the lights and the vocal effects made some kind of sense together. But,
so at this time, were you doing GSL already?
Yeah.
What was the first release you put out?
Okay, so it's the first record came out in October of '93, so that would have been 5 months before we recorded that EP for Gravity.
Okay. Oh, so it was a while before.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
I think a lot of people know like GSL was guaranteed student loan.
Guaranteed Stafford loan.
Oh, Stafford loan.
Which was like a specific kind of student loan.
And then you why did you call it just like a fuck you, like to your
well, because so when I got into the University of Colorado, I applied for financial aid because I needed it, or I had a job and everything, but I couldn't really support myself. And so because of my parents' income or something, like I qualified for a lot more money than I really needed to live. And the first semester I didn't take it. I was like, that's just like, why take money I don't need? And by the following semester, like I started in the spring of '93. Anyway, whatever. By the fall of '93, I was like, I'm taking that money this time because I had all these lofty ideas of what I could do.
It wasn't financial aid, it was a loan, right? So you had to pay it back.
Yes. Okay. Exactly. And so I got some Pell Grants and stuff too. But the lion's share of it was a loan.
Sure.
And so it was a guaranteed Stafford loan. And so I thought, it'll be really funny to take this money and call a record label that.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that funny for that long.
Did it actually say like guaranteed?
No, I always just put GSL. I started out putting GSL Records, and then I remember having a long discussion with Matt once because he never used the word records. It just always said Gravity.
Yeah.
And he was like, I hate putting records because it totally puts you in this box. You can only put out records. And I was like, I never really thought of it like that. I just think it's, it just is kind of generic because everyone says that. And so from that's kind of how I got the Laboratories idea. Was like, well, I don't want to call it, like, what if we just call it something that's not even, doesn't even sound like a record label?
Sure.
And I remember outgrowing the guaranteed Stafford loan thing and thinking like, well, even if I just keep calling it GSL, I want it to mean something. I want to be able to tell people it means something cooler. I remember like spending this whole first VSS tour just sitting in the van, just thinking, like scribbling down ideas of what it could mean.
And then VSS didn't mean anything, right?
Yeah, I mean, not really. Like,
because I was confused. As like, he's got all these freaking weird initial.
Yeah,
things.
I'm like, yeah, and it's funny because some of them like some of my own initials and my dad's initials and stuff. It's like this big weird like melee. But yeah, no, the VSS really didn't mean anything. I mean, the name did evolve out of this phrase that somebody had written in a letter. I had a bunch of foreign pen pals with trade records and stuff with, and so it did evolve out of something there. And like at the time, I had foolishly mentioned it. I had told a couple of friends just like absent-mindedly, like not thinking it was important.
Yeah.
And before I knew it, it was like showing up on flyers saying that. And I was like, oh man, like we gotta, everyone, the whole band, we were like, we gotta squash this because it's dumb and like we don't really want it to mean that.
Like the meaning was on the flyers.
Yeah.
Oh,
the
wow.
full words that we had.
Oh,
that
really?
had, I had told somebody just who was a friend who happened to put on shows and.
Yeah,
she made a flyer for the show, the next show she did, and was just like, and it was just kind of like, like we.
So we don't talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just misleading, and it's just like
let's keep it more mysterious.
You can do your you can Google it.
So it's weird, like okay, so I don't really know how we became. I mean, like we played the show together, and then the Locust happened, but I don't know how did we end up like. Maybe I think I asked you to distribute something. You had started Bottleneck, maybe.
Yeah, started. Yeah.
And then somehow you were like, let me just put out a Locust record. Because I was like kind of shocked that you would be interested.
See, I remember it as you guys asking me and me being surprised that you wanted me to do it.
We thought there was no way. Like,
but I don't think I approached you. I think you asked me. I don't think I might have asked you. I don't think I would have been like intimidated to ask you. I just don't think I could. I don't think I did because I think I would have assumed that you guys would want to do a record with like Deep Six or something.
Yeah.
And so.
But we were, as weird as the Locust was from the beginning until now, it was always a mix of, like we were into, like, we didn't want to pigeonhole ourselves to like.
Sure.
What would be obvious.
But I don't think I knew that.
Yeah.
And you guys had just sort of like.
We'd only done the split with Man as a Bastard and the split with Jenny Piccolo.
Yeah, I mean, and in my mind, you had like very rapidly evolved from Swing Kids, even from Struggle to Swing Kids to this. Locust just seemed like a, I don't know, like just an unprecedented thing for all of you guys. Sure. But I knew like I would see these names on these flyers. I mean, there was association with like Crossed Out and. At the time, Man as the Bastard, which didn't like. Of course, once we started playing with them, like they were, and even with Bottleneck selling their records and stuff. Of course, I figured out who they were. But like,
ironically, and then they ended up becoming putting a record out on Gravity.
Yeah, exactly. But I remember like even in the early, I think I remember when Savalas played like Cell 63 or something, seeing these like Charred Remains flyers.
Oh
and
yeah.
Just thinking like, what the fuck is that?
It
like
sounds brutal
so
sounding.
Weird.
Yeah.
Like,
so
I thought Locust was trying to sort of like infiltrate that world, and I don't think to me, there was the VSS, like we were in the Bay Area. It was like all of this rock and roll revival thing going on.
Oh yeah,
some of which was cool, like the Audience and Starlight Desperation and stuff. And so I felt like naturally kind of like going towards that stuff because it seemed like it was more, like more in a realm of like
to rile people up though too, right?
Well, I mean, I liked the idea of switching stuff up and like having the record. I liked the idea of the label being unpredictable.
Sure.
But I also loved a particular kind of that post-punky, Echo and the Bunnymen, all those groups kind of sound, Bauhaus and all that stuff. And to me, like there was a big thread of that running through those groups, Starlight, the Audience and stuff. To me, like there was like the kind of purist rock and roll thing in San Francisco, Dura Delinquent, and these bands that were like cock rocky Rolling Stones type retro, and then people that were a little bit more combining that with something darker or something that just a different kind of thing, sort of like combining eras, like 60s and 80s kind of thing. That combination was way more interesting to me than 60s only.
Oh, sure.
You know?
Sure. Like the audience then.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. Cool. So you guys came along right when that was all happening, and I know at the time I was thrilled to be able to add you into this mix of stuff, because I was like, this will really fucking, like throw them for a loop kind of thing. But I do remember when we were doing the 7-inch and just being like, just thinking to myself, like, wow, it's such a trip. These guys want to do this with me.
Yeah.
You know?
But I think like for us, we were, for me and I think Bobby and stuff and Dave Astor, like we were all kind of like psyched on a lot of the Gravity stuff, and like those guys really liked Antioch Arrow. So it seemed like GSL and Gravity were like on this sort of same level, and aesthetically and stylistically. And so we were kind of just like trying to also not be pigeonholed like with, I don't know, like His Hero's Gone or what, like we wanted to be like, we're the weirdos, or like we're the like fucked up dudes.
Yeah.
Which is kind of funny because then we like started also obsessing over trying to have synthesizers and stuff, and I think that caused a lot of problems for us. A lot of people like didn't like us because of that, which is great, and then I felt like, oh, it makes sense to not be on that other label and to be on GSL.
Yeah.
So that was cool.
I mean, I always just embraced the idea of mixing things up, and it was funny because I've just been sitting here thinking about just other things that were occurring around the same time, and I remember like quickly realizing that this idea of this like Noah's Ark kind of label with like two of every animal kind of thing, like wouldn't, like, it was cool for me, like at being Noah or whatever, but like all the animals wouldn't really get along.
Sure.
And I remember hanging out outside Gilman, like chatting with Nick Offer from Out Hut and Chick Chick Chick, and I can't remember what record we were talking about doing, but I remember him like really being on the fence about doing a record with me because he was like, I just done a Starlight Desperation record, and he was like, we don't want, we hate that rock and roll thing. We don't want to be rock and roll, and we don't want to be lumped in with this thing going on in the Bay Area. And I just was like, well, I mean, I remember using you guys as the example, like, well, Locust isn't that, and it was kind of like, well, yeah, okay, cool. I mean, the VSS isn't that,
sure.
like, and of course, ultimately they did the record or whatever, but it was like, after a while, like once the label, I think, was known for that, everybody just kind of got on with their own thing. But I think at first there was some sort of like a little bit of bristling about what it really was and what it meant to be associated with it or part of it or whatever.
Which is weird because I mean, I think like that's a thing that a lot of the labels that we've been talking about, Gravity as well, and even 31G, like where you would not really have a style. Because it's funny when people are like, oh, I get this often, like, this just sounds like a 31G band. You're like, what is it? What the hell is that?
Exactly.
Like what? Like so, what is a GSL band? Because you would later on, like even when the Locust stopped releasing records with you, we would, I would get like the new GSL record. Like what is this? This is crazy. Like I was not expecting this, and it was rad, like even like that Mars Volta Tremulant EP, like that was weird to hear. Or I mean, some of it made sense, like the Spoonbender stuff and like the sort of synth heavy. But then you go back and you look and you see all that like kind of 60s rock.
Yeah.
So I think it's rad.
Well, good. I mean, most of the decisions were made on a personal basis. Like, it really helped to like the band. I mean, of course, I would have to like the band, of course, but like, it really helped to like the band as people, and really have a relationship with them. And over time, I realized that in situations where the band was amazing, but the people weren't, it wasn't a good time.
Sure.
And so
it's like a community.
Yeah.
In a sense.
Yeah, I felt like it was, and that might have been a little bit idealistic or naive, but for me it was, because they were all my friends.
So that's an interesting thing, because I feel like in San Diego, when I was growing up and playing like in Struggle, even before I started playing in bands, we would go to shows that would be this sort of mix of stuff. I mean, one of the most odd things I had ever seen was, I remember going to the Che because Heroin was playing, but they were playing with like a 3-piece jazz band, and it was like it was I think it was like maybe it was like guitar, bass, and drums, maybe a piano. Anyhow, it was very traditional jazz, and they were great. Heroin played, and then it was like all you can eat spaghetti. And you're like, that's weird, and that was like the thing. And you're like, no, that makes sense. And then later on, it's like, Struggle play with like a reggae band, and like some like Earth Day thing, or like, and so or like Crash Worship, like that. Where does Crash Worship fit in? So then it was like this mix of stuff, and so I feel like that was, to me, it seemed like a San Diego thing. I don't know if it happened elsewhere, but a lot of people would look inwards at the city and think like, what the hell are you guys doing? And that fact that you can do whatever you want breeds, Drive Like Jehu or whoever, like, because you're capable of not having parameters. And so I felt like maybe GSL, maybe it was like that in Denver, I'm not sure, but maybe GSL embodied that sort of like mindset, or like that way that you created what GSL had become.
Well,
because we would do tours, like GSL, like sort of like tours with bands that people like normally wouldn't go see
together
us with so and so, vice versa, But to all of us, we were like, this is cool. The Peaches,
Yeah.
Or no, it wasn't Peaches. Wait,
you guys played. I mean, you guys. We would. They play. I remember them playing a show at Gilman with you guys in Sunshine.
In Sunshine, in
audience. I mean, it was like basically
audience. And who else? Like
Sunshine, Starlight, Locust. Audience,
I mean, a lot of it,
Peaches.
like Dead and Gone, like that makes sense. But then I remember we'd like throw in like who wasn't after the Peaches? What was the band that they did that you put out after Peaches?
Pattern.
The Pattern. That's what I meant. We did a tour with the Pattern and Dead and Gone, and I was so psyched to be with the Pattern, and those guys were cool. But I was like, I felt bad for them. I was like, you guys are like we're all hard like music, and you're like not. And I feel like the people that were there typically were upset, but to you and us and the bands, it made sense. It was so much fun.
And also for them specifically at the time, like that was a weird time, like that post Strokes era, where there was like this possibility that bands like them would like totally bypass all that and go to this huge other level. And like those guys got signed to a pretty cool label in England, and like, you know what I mean? Like they kind of like were had one foot in a whole other realm. You know what I mean? Like they could have, with enough plays on John Peel or something.
Music loving John Peel.
You know what I mean? They could have like taken off in Europe or what have you. And so like, I mean, it's beside the point in a sense, but at the same time, like their presence as part of this whole thing that we're talking about, like they were friends and they were part of the local scene that I was part of then in Oakland and Berkeley and stuff. And like, it was just like, I loved their band. And like, I wound up being in, Jim was in Your Future and stuff. Like, still tight with all those dudes. But in particular, I think for them at the time, it was like, I think it was like a convenient, like the proximity to GSL was convenient.
For them
in particular, because I mean, we only did that one single. It wasn't really like they were relying on us. It was just a way to kind of like cross pollinate or whatever, or like make stuff aware to other people. And there was never any higher hope than that.
Okay, so it was like a sort of stepping stone to get.
Well, I don't want to say that because I'm not like, no, because that sounds like I'm accusing them of like being.
But that's not really an accusatory thing. I'll say it. Bands do that with 3-1-G, and I'll even say it like, hey, put a record out with us, and you'll probably be able to get more exposure and go on to where you should be.
Well, yeah, okay. I mean, at the time, I think in the case of the Pattern specifically, the Pattern did it at 3 or 4 or 5 or something singles all at once, all on different labels, not on little Joey's bedroom label, but like Lookout put out one, maybe Kill Rock Stars. AT, I think maybe GSL, like, and then something in England. You know what I mean? Like, all like pretty like labels with their thing, and like kind of in a way just sort of like everyone loved those dudes. Everyone knew Chris from Lookout, so it was just sort of like, yeah, fuck, I'll put out a single for you guys. Why wouldn't I?
Yeah, of course.
Like, so, but I didn't. So I ultimately what I'm trying to say is like I didn't feel like they in particular were like a flagship thing for GSL necessarily, but I do see what you're saying in the sense that it was this sort of like disparate stuff or like juxtaposing kind of stuff to work in a sense. But I don't know. I just feel like I've totally gone off on this tangent about this. Like it was not that important.
No, it's interesting though. To me, I think it stemmed out of the fact that we would always you would always try to like have an eclectic mix.
Yeah.
And I think that's important because the eclectic mix shows up in your own personal bands.
Yeah.
So I guess it's like in your, I don't know, DNA or something.
Absolutely. I mean, like, yeah, absolutely. I spent 2 years in South Africa when I was a kid, and I don't remember it, but I feel like it's absolutely like
You don't remember it at all?
Not
How
at
old
all.
were you?
like from 6 months to 2.5 years or something.
okay.
Really young, like right after I was born.
Sure.
But I absolutely think that those 2 years totally are present in me somehow.
Yeah. Wow.
Like I can't really tell you how, but like I have way more. Like at home, I kind of I mostly listen to quote unquote black music. You know what I mean? And I'm the only person in my family like that. I'm not the only one who lived in Africa at that time, and my parents never really cared about music that much.
Yeah.
But I do feel like somehow that like some kernel of that experience like resonates with me and comes out that way or something. You know what I mean? So like, I've always been like having GSL be a multicultural thing for me, like accessible to all kinds of people, men and women and
Sure.
other races or what have you. Like, I don't want to say it was a point of the label, because it wasn't. I mean, the point of the label was just to document these bands or whatever, and to express myself and what was going on in my life. But like,
Maybe it's a subconscious point.
yeah, yeah.
And therefore,
like,
it's pretty important.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
it's sincere.
Yeah, I mean, like I don't listen to strictly punk music.
Yeah.
So the idea of having a record label that was strictly punk music, I probably entertained it for a short period of time once, but I probably just got bored. I mean, like Public Enemy was my favorite band back then. So I was probably always open to something like that coming along. It wasn't until there was like Subtitle or something like that where it was like, oh, well, here's a dude who wants to do something with me. But
Yeah.
like,
But even Public Enemy had that aspect, like they were, doing stuff with Anthrax, and they were, like Terminator X has that song with Black Flag, Rise Above It.
Yeah.
So there's this element where like even they were also like entertaining other aspects of art and.
I mean, I remember, like there's those like stories about Minor Threat playing with, or other DC hardcore bands doing these go-go shows, or like playing with kind of like funk bands or Trouble Funk, other people like that in DC, and these shows that I don't think were like universally successful in the sense that they spawned a movement of those bands playing together or anything, but like those shows did happen in the really early 80s, and in my mind sort of set a precedent that was a possibility, even though it wasn't really even embraced. And then to another extent, groups like Bad Brains, who were like, everybody always hated the reggae part of Bad Brains, but to me, like that was kind of I love the hardcore stuff, but the reggae part I always loved, and like wasn't like most punk kids who were like fast forward to the next song or whatever, you know. So like being aware of that stuff and being really into it and stuff, just kind of I don't know, like embracing the, like, I don't know, I wanted GSL to be a really like dynamic, interesting thing that wasn't pigeonholable as one cultural thing or another, and it's important to me to mix things up like that. So having it be all one thing, or catering to one sound or one cultural identity, just seems really boring.
Sure. But do you think that maybe that mindset or that idea or business platform is part of the reason why you struggled towards the end, I guess, before you had called it quits with GSL? And let's start to talk about like your concept or your thoughts on like why GSL had to stop.
Well,
it's massive, and I'm sorry.
That's okay. To answer the first part of your question, like, I think the label was ambitious in the sense that we were like trying to be maybe naively optimistic in the sense that we were, or I felt like we could get away with putting out all these different kinds of things and arguably still be successful with it. And I there were precedents for it at the time. Like you could look at a label like Sub Pop, for example. They didn't really just put out indie rock records. I mean, there's a little bit of everything on there if you dig, and even going back to like the, Slayer TSOL split 7-inch they did back in the early 90s. Like there's lots of random one-off things there, and there's like kind of the whole spectrum of music, and I felt like they were a good example of something that like the identity of the label was enough to be a vehicle for all these things that didn't necessarily like have anything to do with one another.
So like more of like a branding.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I felt like that was possible with what we were doing. And again, like the community thing was definitely there because like, you know, I mean, Subtitle was on tour with Go 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 Earhart or the Mars Volta or the, you know, and everybody was like making the effort of like, you know, working together and trying to achieve a common goal kind of thing with it. But having said that, I think it's naive to think that like the average kind of like person who listens to mainstream music and gets into a band like the Mars Volta is going to simply because of the association of all these other groups get into them. It seems, you know, there might be 1 in 10 kids who loves them, who really loves the Locust and buys all those records. But
like chances are the people that like the Mars Volta would like the Pattern and not the Locust.
Yes, I mean that's one. I mean possibly that's one example. I think that they just appeal to such a Chili Peppers kind of audience in a sense. Like I mean, there's the hardcore like people who buy underground records, you know, and then there's like, I mean, of course, there's a whole spectrum of people, but like when you get to that level on a huge label and you're like the band is everywhere, naturally the audience becomes less specialized to what they're to what this band and this culture is, and more, you know, generic. I don't know how else to say it. Like the more just like,
but very
passive listeners, passive fans. You know, people.
It's not special. It's special, but not special like punk or something.
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, I don't mean to generalize, but I'm just saying like when you become a hugely successful or hugely visible major label band, the audience that you might be used to catering to, real specialized people who pay attention to underground music and are familiar with a whole cultural shape of this thing.
Sure.
You know, like once it goes beyond that, all these new people might not care about all the other stuff that's so, you know, so like the Mars Volta's presence on GSL was you know, it was like like those guys aren't naive. Like coming out of the gate, it looks better to be on GSL for your first record than to be on a major label like that. And we all understood that. That was why we did what we did.
The
like,
Tremulant EP.
Yeah, like it would, you know, like it might not make a difference now, but 15 years ago, it still made a difference how you were perceived as a band and what your relationship was to corporate America.
Retained credibility.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And you can look at it now and say, oh, well, that was like, you know, conniving or whatever. Like
on whose part?
Well, you could say that the band were kind of being manipulative in a sense because like, or I mean, any band like that, any band, you know, but like.
That was a very interesting point of the industry because I mean, I dealt with it with the Blood Brothers, same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, I don't think it's even necessarily something for people to be embarrassed about. You're kind of like proving that you have some sort of like credibility before you like sell out. I mean, that's really what it is. And like, if it's a foregone conclusion that you're going to sell out, like it was when the Mars Volta started, because they you know, like killed one enormous thing and then had a bidding war over the next thing. Like, you know what I mean? It was like, it wasn't an accident that they were big right away. I don't think.
Okay.
You know,
yeah,
I remember having a discussion with a friend of ours here when they were going to play the Brick by Brick before they had a record out. And it was kind of like, dude, you should come and see them play the Brick by Brick because you're never going to see them in a place like this again. And he was like, well, yeah, you hope so. I'm like, no, I don't hope so. I couldn't care less if they fucking play in a garage for the rest of their career. But I'm telling you, like, this thing is not going to be in the Brick by Brick for very long. Take my word for it. Like I know what's going on behind the scenes.
Sure.
You know, like there's way too many people like chomping at the bit to see this for what it is.
Yeah,
like
sure.
You might think that these are just kids playing punk music still, but it's gone beyond that.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
So that
Everything
was
has to
like
change.
the early version of Mars Volta.
Yeah, right at the beginning, and so, you know, I partnered with Omar while we were doing the De Facto record, which came first, and there's nothing contrived about that. There was nothing. There was no strategizing. De Facto was a pure thing that they did for fun, that they loved. It was music that wasn't commercial, that they were doing. Like, I mean, to go from like stardom of At the Drive-In to saying like we're a dub reggae band. It was like, what?
Yeah.
Like, what are you talking about? Like, you may as well say you're like a Dixieland. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's just like was so, for most people, so incongruous and random. And I was like, awesome, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I love that music. Let's do a record together, you know? And so,
Which is funny because I don't like that music at all.
Yeah.
And I remember like the Locust played shows with them, and then we were supposed to do a whole European tour.
I remember.
Before it became Mars Volta,
Yeah.
and I was like, that's cool. Let's tour the band that's fucking dub and reggae. Like, cannot stand that music, but I like those guys so much. Like, that'll be
yeah.
great.
But imagine how, like, on paper, imagine how eclectic that tour was. Like,
Sure.
you guys, Electra Lochman, those bunch of German women paying tribute to Fugazi. Like, that's
Yeah.
pretty unusual.
Yeah.
Even now, probably. And then them.
Yeah.
Like, you know,
Yeah.
like,
What we would be the odd band out at that bit on that bill,
although you would have been the draw. It would have been your audience seeing them.
I guess. But it was still a little difficult once they pulled off that
Yeah,
tour
that's
for
right,
us.
because De Facto had toured Europe and had been successful touring Europe, and they had billed the shows as De Facto presents the Mars Volta.
Mars Volta, yeah.
But anyway, I can't remember what my point was, but
Well, we were trying to figure out this like sort of like linear perspective on like how it came to a stop. GSL.
okay, so yeah, I mean, the short version, even though I spent a lot of time talking about the long version, we put out, in my opinion, the direction of the label was compromised because it was very difficult to keep up with the demand for the Mars Volta's records. Okay, so producing a massive amount of records, repressing records, triple record jackets, all this stuff, picture discs and all this stuff.
So are you talking about the full lengths that were they co-released with another label?
Yes. So they were signed first of all to Universal Records and then later to Warner Brothers, and their deal with those labels allowed for their own label, i.e. GSL, because we were partners by then, to have the rights to issue the vinyl of their records. And so we did that for all the records, with the exception of, up until the one that was the Grammy winner, which actually came out on, Universal put that one out themselves because GSL was done.
Okay.
So keeping up with the demand for those records, keeping them in print and everything was a huge undertaking. And it created very significant cash flow problems all the time.
Because you would have to invest in putting the records out there and
Yes.
not getting your return.
And then waiting for the big Mortem check 6 months later or
Yeah.
something like that. So there was that issue. There was also the fact that I was still coming from a Discord frame of mind where I didn't want to charge too much for the records, and I was hung up always on pricing the records, and the guys in the band and the Mars Volta and basically every other band were real hands off. They trusted us to take care of that end of things and just whatever. And we weren't selling those records for enough. Like everything was too cheap. And
But you were not losing money on them.
Well, no, but I mean, we certainly weren't making the kind of profit that we probably should have to really run a sensible business. And, it was, all of this was compounded too by this idea that, like, at least I was kind of using the Mars Volta to expose these other groups.
Sure.
And I felt like it was just a matter of time till we were going to start really breaking these bands to their audience, or something. Like
So the like later releases on GSL.
yeah, and so we were, basically just like putting out too much stuff, too often. You also get into a routine. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Like at that level with a distribution thing, where it's like, you kind of I see it happen with with the alternative technical. I mean, everybody, especially like, it's not Mordem's fault or anything like that, but at the time I noticed it happening with a lot of those labels, just this falling into this routine of putting out stuff all the time. Like whether it's the best thing you could put out or not, like just like it becomes at some point kind of like essential part of maintaining the regularity of everything to keep having stuff come out.
Yeah.
If you have these periods where there's not stuff coming out, it kind of messes everything up. It gets really difficult. It's like two opposite forces. You know what I mean? Like this hugely popular group that required all these resources, a whole bunch of other groups that were taking resources and not really regenerating them.
So you had just money going out and like not coming back
Exactly.
fast enough or in the right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then, you know, things were changing with everything about the music industry. The download, you know, the iPod came out and like, you know, like the Christmas, the iPod, you know, the iPod came out in the following, whatever Christmas it was, 2000, let's say 7 or 8 or something. Whenever it was that the iPod really like went global.
Yeah.
Like our distribution check from Mordant, who would it be at that point? I think it was Red Eye or something. But our check like fell in half. The next, it was permanently like the iPod came out, and a month later, we got the sales report, and it was like it had like the bottom half of it had just fallen away.
And it
And from
never
that, it
recouped.
never came back,
Yeah.
and it was like, wow, that little machine just like completely killed half of what we're doing.
Yeah. But you were still manufacturing CDs.
Yeah, which was in hindsight like really short-sighted and foolish and like.
But no one really could have seen that coming.
No, and I know we definitely weren't the only people doing it and
Yeah.
getting stuck with them. But man, I don't have regrets about it because everything happens, I think, for the way it's supposed to happen. But if I did have the opportunity to go back and undo any of that stuff or redo it, I would definitely like press less of everything and, you know, fewer records overall, fewer titles, but not get, there's a certain amount of like bravado that you start buying, like you kind of like, yeah, well, we're gonna sell this many thousands of this thing, or like, you know, we have to make this many, like it's like we're not being optimistic if we only press 500, you know, or
Yeah.
you know, you can rationalize it any number of ways, but like it's also easy to just fall into a routine and think you're doing the right thing, or think that something is just a lull that's going to change and go back to the way things were. And like, even though it's a small business and you're like right there seeing how things are going, it's also, at least I was finding it easy to finding it difficult to react quickly enough to know how to react to things that were going on. And so, yeah, we just had money going out. The records were costing more and more. We were hiring publicists by that point. The last couple of years, like every record, every album would cost, you know, $5,000 to $10,000 just on the marketing part.
Yeah.
And would sell. I mean, no one sold records like you guys did.
Like who?
Locust.
Oh.
You know, the Mars Volta is head and shoulders above everybody
Okay,
else.
yeah.
But as far as every other band on the label goes, there was a couple of, you know, the Chick 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 album did great. We did a faint 12-inch that did great. There's things here and there that were really big and successful, but like as far as consistent numbers, or even, you know, even just the idea of breaking even or breaking 1,000 records, got more and more
Harder to
difficult
do.
and less likely. And it started seeming like by 2004, 2005, like 2000 seemed like the golden years. You know, like the things that were possible in 2000 were absolutely no longer possible by 2005 for us, unless we were like really willing to completely change the way we were doing things and adapt. And, you know, probably would have been wise to hire some young people who were more savvy about, you know, social media as it was coming up. And like, but by that point I was like, you know, personally speaking, I had
Social media like barely existed.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was like the dawn of like, that was still
MySpace,
MySpace, and then the dawn of Facebook and stuff. But like, yeah, I mean, you know, like we had a cool website, but it could have probably been cooler, you know. But by that point I was, you know, I had been doing the label for 12, 13 years and was, had largely accomplished everything I'd ever set out to do with it, which was really nothing. I mean, in a sense, like I never had a goal in mind, you know, like I'm a driven person and an ambitious person, but when it comes to goals, like core black and white things I want to accomplish, I haven't had that many in my life. I've just kind of like it's been more generalized than that. Like I know what I want to be doing, and I know what feels right or what have you, and another thing that I'm interested in, and that the ideas that I want to try and propagate in the world. And
So maybe like the label was like, I don't know, like the link to you becoming more of a design artist.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It-
I mean, because
absolutely.
correct me if I'm wrong, it wasn't like your first kind of like shot at like designing was like the Locust record cover.
Yeah, I mean that was certainly that was like
we just-
certainly my like first Photoshop attempts and things like that. Like
Yeah.
I learned digital art. I learned how those programs work. Julie and I kind of learned to get. She sort of learned and then taught me. But to make your record, that first 12-inch, and to do the Starlight Desperation record, which was virtually the same time.
What was the cover of that?
It's pink and blue, and it's kind of like this. Yeah.
Yep.
And I had gone to school to do art and like completely got distracted by music, and I finished school and got an art degree, but like couldn't have cared less about it. And, like was running a club, was in a band on tour all the time, was putting on shows for
Which club?
this place in Boulder called Club 156, which was on campus, like in the student union. So I managed that place for 2 years and booked it, and like art just became less and less important. Like I mean, I would do the art for these records that were these, the Angelhair thing. I would take a lot of pride in doing the art for it, but I like school art and stuff I was supposed to be learning and techniques I was supposed to be mastering theoretically, like just totally were not even important to me. And so I squeezed by and graduated, and by the time the label was winding down, it was sort of like I was starting to feel I had been creating art for GSL for advertising and occasionally for record covers and stuff like that, your records and stuff. But I was feeling like I had neglected that part of me, and I was burnt on quote unquote business.
But the GSL's like design or like style, like artistic style, was your style. Like it like even now, like in reference to your book, it seems like GSL to me. I mean, it's definitely been fine-tuned and become something else, but for so long you would see it like in the fonts and the way the text was laid out and the way some of the color schemes were. Like it was you could tell you were driving it.
That's interesting. Well, that's cool to hear. First of all, like that. I mean, and I know like the book, the Headspace's font is the same as the VSS font. So like, it wasn't an accident. I just do love that font though, too. But earlier on, you'd said something about how like GSL and Gravity sort of like seemed on this even keel or something at that point, and like, I mean, there was no single bigger influence on GSL as Gravity. I mean, like Gravity was like what he was doing was totally just for me like a complete like reimagining of the whole idea of punk records, and the thing is that I was so impressed with it and so kind of in awe in it and so immediately like disillusioned by all the copycat stuff that happened instantly. Like, I mean, within a few months of those envelope records coming out, not in the paper bag record so much, but like the envelope thing just got copied endlessly. And the whole Matt kind of developed that thing where he would like typewrite with a typewriter and then write over it, actually trace the letters with a pen or a pencil too. So I had this doubled up weird effect that was pretty unique to Heroin at first.
Yeah.
That was everywhere within a few months, and so the whole thing just was so accessible and so easy to do. It just became dumb.
Sure.
Boring. And so my whole thing with GSL was like, I felt like the way to distinguish what we were doing and give it its own aesthetic was to do what we did with your record with the 7-inch, was to make the most plastic record possible. Instead of having it be the most crafty or papery or like hand
kind of organic
done thing. Yeah. Instead to just like, even though I appreciated that aesthetic and I thought it was really cool, I felt like Gravity had already cornered the market on it, and to do the same thing would be redundant and dumb, and to do regular stuff would just be to just do regular stuff. And so I felt like, what can we do that would be a nod to that's the opposite? And so it was like, let's just make this thing, let's put it in a plastic sleeve, the thickest kind of plastic sleeve possible.
But we kind of, I mean, the Locust 7-inch was like we just wanted it to look like that VSS 7-inch.
Yeah.
With the not the full back cover, but that was also to showcase the vinyl, which I thought was really cool.
I totally forgot about that VSS 7-inch. You're absolutely right. I forgot we did that. So that's where the idea for that came from.
Yeah.
Was like, well, okay, it
was well, that's funny too, because it was sort of, maybe it wasn't cheaper, but you were like printing just like a piece of paper that wasn't even a full 14 inches long.
Yeah.
But it was so much cooler to the fan because you could just instantly see like what the vinyl looked like.
Yeah, exactly. And I thought that was like, and then of course all the different colors of records and stuff like that. I felt like that was the solution to that design problem. And but yeah, the VSS thing was that was, I guess, the prototype for it in a sense, but even that was like not. I mean, it definitely was that idea, but I felt like the Locust thing took it to the next stage by it because there were so many versions of it.
Well, I do see the shift from like the Angelhair 7-inch to the VSS 7-inch because Angelhair 1 was more like that kind of organic-y, like crafty, and then the VSS was more like
Photoshop.
Plastic is a good example. Like it just seemed like almost like a Japanese toy, like it was so cool, like a, I don't know, like Megatron or something, and it definitely with the Locust stuff, it was like bright colors and contrasting and campiness and, even like the use of all the camouflage shit, and then put like bright colors on it and whatever. So, that seemed to be like, but then I would always assume or like associate, GSL stuff with like very vibrant, bright colored stuff, where like that Gravity stuff or a lot of like that stuff from that era was like
muted
earth tones and
well, first of all, they're using uncoated paper for everything, so all the ink is soaking into the paper and getting dull, so nothing has any reflective value.
Well, and they're using cardboard and spray paint.
Exactly.
So
but that's interesting. I've never really thought about it that way, but I see your point, and I get.
It's funny though too, because for me, I like putting out my first record, the Unbroken 7-inch. It was like, I'm gonna start this label and put out Unbroken, and so for Unbroken they had already done records with like New Age Records, and it was glossy and it was like very like not Photoshop, but just like, I don't know, slick,
pro,
and they wanted to go like the Gravity way, they wanted to be like rubber stamps, which was influenced by Vinyl Communications and Gravity.
Sure.
And so I was like, I didn't want it to be like arts and crafts. I was like, okay, like let's do a record. It's gonna be rad and it's gonna look good. And they're like, no, we want it to look shitty, like as shitty as possible. And I was like, what? And I was kind of confused, but it worked out in my first record putting out, on a label, starting a label, that worked out great for me because the costs were nothing.
Yeah.
Which is funny because then you think like why a lot of that stuff started. I mean, all the use of those envelopes was a brilliant idea. Even the paper bag thing that Matt did was a brilliant idea.
It really was.
Yeah, saved a lot of money, and no one ever had done that before.
Yeah.
But you're right, it got ruined. I mean,
anything that's that easy to do is just like, that's my big problem with punk ideology in general. DIY is an awesome idea, and it's certainly like been the motor behind everything I've done for most of my life. But I think like being able to DIY, doing it yourself means anybody can do it, and that throws the doors open to a bunch of people who aren't very creative. And so like that's why hardcore is as generic as it is. Like just to use one example. Like so it's a bit of a catch-22. Like I totally believe in the ideology of do it yourself, and even if you're making redundant, repetitive stuff, the fact that you're doing it is better than not doing it. But does the world do you need to share it with the world? I don't know. Like I think we're totally going off on a tangent, but I feel like a lot of people aren't honest with themselves, or are and the same could be said for me. Like I'm not suggesting that I'm any kind of exception to this, but I think like the world is full of redundant ideas, and I think the joy of creating music or expressing yourself isn't enough for a lot of people. They have to share it with people,
and it's becoming easier.
And it's becoming easier, and in the sense, it's becoming easier to be good. And arguably, there's more talented musicians and performers living right now than there ever has been before. Like I understand all those things, but I also think that like when you are contributing to a culture that welcomes everybody's contribution, you're bound to start getting contributions that are just kind of like substandard because in the spectrum of human behavior, there's always going to be people phoning it in. You know what I mean? There's always going to be people who are just doing it. There's going to be the people who are doing it to drive themselves and evolve and create something new and communicate. And there's people who are doing it just to be part of something or to contribute to something they love or whatever, but they just don't, for whatever reason, they're not pushing them, you know, like, and again, this is such a can of worms, because like, what is creativity and what is validity of something? Like, it's totally subjective. Every person has a different opinion of that. That was kind of the point with putting these punk rockers on the cover of the Angelhair record, was like to like drive the point home. Like, this thing is so generic already, you know, and it's as meaningless as insects. It's tiny. Yeah. It's like it doesn't. It's like a microscopic thing that goes on, and then you grow up and you kind of like.
That's what that cover was from.
That's what it means to me.
Fuck, that's crazy. I was drawn towards the punk aspect. I was like, that's crazy, because at that point we had already sort of denounced like Spikes and Doc Martin. You know, and I was like, what the fuck, that's the dude with the mohawk? And then I thought like, whoa, bugs are cool. You know, like, I don't know, like pre-Locust kind of like art, whatever. So I was like, this is a fucking rad record cover, and I don't understand it.
Oh, well, good. I mean, that's good, and that's cool too. And like it doesn't, you know, I don't necessarily need for anybody to understand it. Like my concept for it doesn't need to be anyone else's, certainly. That's
very interesting.
But that picture of that guy, that advertisement that's from, like, I'm sure you probably can relate. Like, I used to buy MRR every month religiously for probably, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. I mean, I would be there waiting for it. You know, it was so important, and there was so much in it, and yet the stuff that stood out more than any, the things that seemed the most peculiar about it were the things that never changed. Like, it was such an important, timely thing. It had so much dynamic information in it that would change from month to month, that the things that wouldn't change about it became conspicuous. So there was these ads for these companies. One of them was Subterranean Records, the mail order company. They had this ad with these cartoon apple cores talking to each other, and it was like someone's idea of a joke, because it's hardcore music and there's apple cores, and so this totally silly ad with these apple cores chit-chatting about how to mail order ran month after month after month for like years. And it was like, can't anybody at Subterranean come up with a new ad for their shit? Like, this is so redundant, you know? And like, that's just one example. There was and I guess in a way, it's just like, you could look at it and be like, who really cares about it? You know, like, these guys were probably busy or whatever. But at the time, like, this thing was like an important thing to me. Culturally, it was like, and if you weren't keeping up with changing, if you didn't have something new to say every month, it kind of became this cartoon. And I saw these labels just re-upping this ad every month, running the same ad for the same record 2-3 years in a row. Like, and it was like, who the fuck is buying this record? And like, who's this band? Like, this thing is so, and so it almost became like a, you know, back in the day when you'd be like the Cal Worthington commercials in LA, like, you know, like everybody knew the song because the commercial was always on. Yeah. It was like something like that. Like, everyone knows this ad because it's always in the paper. No one's going to buy the record. No one even knows who the shit is anymore. It's just like another part of punk that has become this silly cartoon of itself. And that's what I was getting at. And like, I realize that's like totally not obvious and not even.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
You know, and it's not as though we were like reinventing. Like, what were we doing that was so unique? Nothing. We were just like another generation of stuff contributing to this. Like,
that's very humble of you to say that. But like, you did, that record was in our little, you know, microcosm of a world was groundbreaking.
Well, that's awesome to hear.
People were like, what the fuck is this? Musically, lyrically, the way it looked, everything was different. And we were like, that's just weird.
Well, cool. Yeah. And that part of it is, I guess, maybe it's cool to hear that, because it's a little bit I'm a little too close to it to really, of course, you know what I mean?
Which maybe takes it to that point where it's like so sincere, because you had no fucking idea. But to everybody else, we were all like, holy crap, this thing is really weird.
Wow.
So it was the opposite of the hardcore ad, the Apple Core ad.
That's cool, and that was, so that's, to me, that's like the true, like, that record is a success because of that, because like, I mean, it's just transcended that, like, you know what I mean? It's like it's totally achieved its point in a way, and that's really amazing, because was born out of something that was just kind of like our weird commentary on something that like I don't think any of us ever expected
Sure.
it to resonate with anybody in a over any period of time.
Yeah.
You know, all of that stuff was meant to be communicated with people immediately in that moment, you know, and then
that's how I think everybody was looking at it at that time. I mean, now it's weird, you know, to be like in our 40s or, you know, like I think when we were like doing that in our teens and our 20s, it was always like right now is all that I like, you know, our folk, at least me and all my bandmates and friends, it was like we didn't look past like the next month, you know, like let alone like 20 years. It was just kind of like right now is what it is.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy? I mean, and I think about how long all these bands lasted, and it's like, it's almost inconceivable, you know? And to think it's been like 10 years since the last time I was in a band that tried to be a functioning band, who I've been like, you know, kind of like wishing would actually try and like all get back together and do something together.
Which band?
Optional Body.
Oh, okay.
I would love for Optional Body to actually do something. That was 10 years ago. Like, that's, to me, it seems like, I don't know, last year or something, you know what I mean? Like, seems like not that much has happened between then and now. Like, musically, for me, or even for any of us, you know what I mean? Like, everybody who was in that band 10 years ago hasn't really done much since then. We've all, like, gotten on with our lives and had jobs and careers or what have you. Some people have gotten married and stuff. Like, it's not as though as people we've just been treading water. Like, things have happened and stuff. And yet, like, that band to me is like still where my heart and my mind are. If I was going to be in a band tomorrow, I would want to be in that band.
Wow.
You know what I mean? Like, and it's just so weird to think of like the span of time since that was even happening is double the time that the VSS and Angelhair existed combined. You know, like that's just hard to understand. Yeah. You know, like wow.
And it was only a few songs.
Optional Body, it was like, about 8 songs.
Oh, is that many? Okay.
There's only a couple on that record, but we wrote a bunch more. And Russell's got all these, like, Russell recorded every rehearsal. And so he's got them all, like, every now and then I'll get, like, his email with these random things attached. It's like, you know, you could just add vocals to this and we can mix it. And we could, or we could just go in and really record the songs and make a record like we should have in the first place. Yeah. So, I don't know.
So what's stopping you?
I don't know. Nothing really. Nothing is stopping us except us. I mean, like everyone, those 3 guys all live in LA, and like 3 different corners of LA, but still all in LA regardless. And I would drive there every weekend if I knew it would amount to something.
Maybe they'll hear this and be like, "All right."
And I've said it to all. I've said it. Maybe I haven't said it to Rocky recently, but I've said it to Russell and I've said it to Alan. Like those guys know. Like, they know I would love to do it.
Yeah.
And they're busy and they have, you know. Like everyone's got stuff going on in their lives, but I think, you know, I don't think anybody would necessarily not like to do it. I think it's just the effort it would take to make it happen. I don't know if it's there.
Yeah.
You know?
But maybe some of those things take time to like make it relevant.
Yeah, you might be right.
In the era of reunion shows. Or whatever, you know, not that would be a reunion, but
no, but I mean in a sense it would, but I, you know, and every now and then there's, you know, the discussion comes up with guys in other bands and like, you know, I don't think it'll ever be completely ruled out. The VSS thing seems like a really like a long shot. I think the Angelhair of the 2, that would be more likely, but even that, I don't know. But the one I would want to do would be Optional Body, the one that would make me feel like we were doing something
cool or whatever.
Well, productive. Like,
probably because it never got the chance to breathe.
Yeah,
you know?
And it would never reached its like potential. And I love all these dudes that I've been in these bands with, but like those 3 guys are still like, I still talk to them all the time or see them, and like they're like 3 of the best friends in my life. Like nothing would make me happier than like to do a record with them and go on tour, like whatever, you know. It would be really, you know, like that would be really cool. Yeah. But short of that, I don't feel unfulfilled in any way, and so like at the same time, like without the personal thing for me anymore, like the art, for me making visual art is really like what I want to do. Sure. And I love contributing to music and like doing stuff with my friends, and so if that's possible simultaneously, I'm happy to do it. I love to do it. And
like this now. I mean,
exactly.
Doing the Planet B song and stuff.
Yeah. But the idea of doing a long distance project and a whole album with people I don't know.
Yeah, of course.
just, you know, it's...
Well, then it also becomes that thing where it's not special. It's not, you know, you're not, it's like putting out a band that you don't know.
Yeah,
you know, it's
exactly.
the same kind of
And
thing.
it would be different if I was like a young kid who wants to be a singer in a hardcore band. Who's like, well, these guys, like, I'll just move to the other side of the country and join the band. You know what I mean? Like, it'll be awesome. But that's not the situation. And like, you know, like it's the personal part of it that's appeals to me now. You know,
it's interesting. So that was our conversation with Sonny Kay. Be sure to check out his book that he just put out, Headspaces. You can get it from the 31G website, and check out what Sonny's done in the past. Check out Angelhair, VSS, and definitely check out what GSL was and its importance, I think, in musical history.
Yep, definitely. Bands, artists, just take notes on his history and see what he did just by himself for bands and with bands, and, you know, just utilize that and be original.
Yeah, cool. And stay tuned and check out our upcoming future podcasts.